Deuteronomy lesson number 5, just so happens to be chapter 5 as well. I got the 10. What's the 10? 10 Commandments. Where in the Bible are the 10 Commandments listed? Exodus what? It's Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. I asked that question because years ago I was sitting there talking with my uncle and a bunch of people. He said, "Where are the 10 Commandments in the Bible?" I said Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. And he looked at me like I had two heads. I said, well, that's what it is. But he was surprised that I knew. So anyway, it's Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. They're slightly different, but they say the same thing. So we're going to be talking about the 10 tonight. And so we're going to start with Deuteronomy, the 5th chapter, verse 1. Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "Israel, listen to the statutes and ordinances I am proclaiming as you hear them today. Learn and follow them carefully. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. He did not make this covenant with our ancestors, but with all of us who are alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face to face from the fire on the mountain." So, to get us started, the word he uses for listen there, the Hebrew meaning for that word is hear, listen, heed, and obey. So there's more than just listen when you look at the full meaning of the Hebrew word. Statutes and ordinances, the two different Hebrew words it uses there. For statutes, it generally refers to laws between God and man. In other words, the ritual laws and so on. And the word for ordinances that's used in the Hebrew is laws between man and his neighbor, laws governing ethical behavior. So how many of the 10 are between God and man, and how many are between man and man? You don't have to answer that right now. Learn and follow them carefully. I put not just blind faith, but said follow them carefully. Does this mean, how many of you ever had to memorize the 10 Commandments when you were in Sunday school? I think we did at one time.
I think we did in youth fellowship on Sunday evening, and I did it because the prize for doing it was a candy bar.
You got a candy bar for a prize. So that would, listen, if you want me to memorize the 10 Commandments for a candy bar, I'll do it. But does this mean just memorize? When he says, learn and follow them carefully. Follow them carefully. Is that different than just memorizing? A lot of times we'll memorize Scripture, and it's good to memorize Scripture, and it's good to have it a supply of them when you need them, but it's better to memorize them and pay attention to what they're saying and practice them and listen to them carefully. Like it says, learn and follow them carefully. Not just follow them carefully. I put just memorizing doesn't necessarily make it a part of us. When we learn and follow them, it implies study and action. There's different kinds of learning. We know you have visual learning, you have auditory learning, and what they call tactile or tactile kinesthetic learning, which is what you do. And which do you learn the most from? Pardon me? When you do. But if you see, you hear, and you do, it's even more powerful. But it's better, what you do is like I had a high school course in bookkeeping, and I had a college course in bookkeeping, and I couldn't have kept anybody's books, and I passed both classes because I'd never done it. I had never done them up until when I was involved in business and I had to do them. Then I said, now that makes sense. I didn't know what in the world that meant, but once it was hands-on, then you learn how to do things, and that's what it takes. That's just like, why do we need to know and understand the rules when it comes to sports? There was a guy that told this story. It was I don't remember if it was a devotional or what it was. He said he carried his son to soccer every Saturday, and there was a guy there who he refed and he took care of everything. They got there and he wasn't there. The guy wasn't there. So he decided, well, I'll fill in for him. He said, in a little while, it was pure chaos. He said, I didn't know the rules. I didn't know what was in, I didn't know what was supposed to do. He said, in just a few minutes, the guy showed up. He said within 10 minutes, everything was in order. Everything ran smoothly. When we have the rules, when we understand the rules, life is better. When we practice the rules, life is better. As we learn and follow the commandments, they become part of us, and we grow closer to the one who ordained these rules. So the more we follow them, the more we practice them, the closer we become to the God who created these rules. Why did he create the rules? Verse 3. He did not make this covenant with our ancestors, but with all of us who are alive today. What in the world does he mean by that? Who did God make a covenant with up until this time? He made a covenant with Adam and Eve, with Noah, that we know of. He made a covenant with Abraham, and that's the one that we get all the rest of it's followed from. And then he made the covenant with the people in Israel. And this, he said, he did not make this covenant with our ancestors, but with all of us who are alive here today. Many people at translating and looking at the Hebrew and they say, he did not make it just with the ancestors, but with us. In other words, the ancestors were included too. What I think is important about this is they understand this is not the covenant of our ancestors. This is the covenant with me. So God has made a covenant with people ahead of me, but the covenant that I have with God is between me and God. And I think that's what he's trying to point out here. 5th verse. At that time I was standing between the Lord and you to report the word of the Lord to you, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up to the mountain. And he said, and this we will start with the 10 commandments here. So if you all want to memorize them, here's your chance. But before we do, why is the 10, how many laws were there? Like 613 laws. Why are these 10 treated differently than all the rest of them? That's what we're going to answer here. First reason, direct divine revelation. The 10 commandments were given by God himself. In fact, it says God wrote them at Mount Sinai, spoken directly to the people and inscribed by his finger. So the first one that we're looking at is he gave these 10, he gave directly to them before he did anything else, and he inscribed them on stone. The rest of the laws came over a period of time. Number 2, universal moral foundation. While the Mosaic law includes ceremonial, civil, and moral statutes tailored to the Israelites' covenant life, the 10 commandments are considered a concise summary of God's moral requirements for all humanity. You think about the 10 commandments, especially the ones where they're between people, the one like do not murder and so on. All those are relevant. I don't care what society that you have and what country you're from, they're all relevant. That's like some of them were saying, over the years when they're arguing about should we have the 10 commandments posted in the schoolhouses, and there was one particular atheist that said, if you do, people might read them. You think, well, I hope so. And I was thinking, what point are you trying to make here? Number 3, the kernel of the Torah. Jewish tradition teaches that the 10 commandments contain the essential principles from which the rest of the 613 commandments, mitzvah, emerged. In other words, all the rest of the 613 are based on these 10. So you can get the summation of all this 613 is in this. Covenantal significance. At Sinai, the 10 commandments were part of a covenant God made with Israel, marking their transformation from slaves in Egypt into a holy nation under his law. So they were part of the covenant. This 10 was part of the covenant that he made with them initially when he got them out of the land of Egypt. 5. Distinctive presentation and purpose. The Ten Commandments are presented as a distinct set of words in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, with a few variations in wording and emphasis. Their purpose is to establish clear, unambiguous moral boundaries, while the rest of the Torah's laws provide detailed regulations for worship, social order, and ritual practice. That's number 5. Everybody up with me so far? Number 6. Now this is the last one. So, enduring relevance. Because they are rooted in God's character and universal moral truths, the Ten Commandments are seen as enduring principles that continue to guide ethical life. Even as the Mosaic Law's specific regulations are fulfilled or adapted in the later covenants. Because they are God's direct, universal moral code, the foundation upon which the rest of the Torah's laws are built, and the core of Israel's covenant relationship with Him. That's a lot, that's a mouthful. But it's enduring relevance. In other words, it's relevant no matter what time it is, what generation it is, and people say, but this is the 21st century now. That doesn't change this code. Or it doesn't change the fact that we need the code. Verse 6. I am the... If you look at the Jewish statements, they call them, the Ten Commandments, they divide them. Their first one is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. That's their number 1. Their number 2 is, do not have any other gods besides me. Why is this verse 6, important to begin the commandments with? Why did God start up? Why didn't He just start with the commandments? He said, "You shall have do not have any other gods besides me." Why didn't He just start with that? Why did He start with, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Egypt"? He defined who they were. It defined who He was. It defined what He did for them. In other words, this is relevant. He's reminding them. It's good to remind ourselves of who God is and who Jesus is on a regular basis. It's important because once you understand who made these laws, then you'll understand how important these laws are. And He says, do not have any other gods besides me. This does not imply that there are other gods, as some people say it does. It doesn't imply that. All this says is, all He's saying is there are people that think there's other gods, but I'm not saying there's other gods. I'm telling you not to have any before me. Verse 8. Do not make an idol for yourself in the shape of anything in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow in worship to them and do not serve them, because I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. This sounds unfair, because He's saying, I will visit these upon 3rd and 4th generation of people. What He's saying, really, what this commandment is saying is, if you don't follow these commandments, it will plague the next 3rd and 4th generation. I will bless 1,000 generations, but if you don't follow these commands, it's going to affect you and your children and your grandchildren and generation after generation after generation. What was the first thing when Moses stayed up on the mountain too long? They thought he'd been there too long. What did the people come to Aaron and ask him to do? To build them, and they brought their gold. They brought their earrings and nose rings and jewelry. They brought their gold. This is gold that they had in their hand. They brought this to Aaron and gave it to Aaron and said, we want you to make us an idol. We want you to make us a god. That's what they were saying. We want you to make us a God. And of course, I still love the way Aaron said when Moses comes back down, jumps on Aaron's case, and Aaron said, I just threw the gold and stuff in, and out came this calf. He's like everybody else. What they wanted something they could see. They wanted something they could handle. They wanted something they could touch. They wanted something that they could hear. They had seen the mountain all lit up. They had seen the clouds over there. They had heard the earthquakes and the shaking of the land. They had heard all that, but that wasn't enough to them. When he stayed up there a little too long, they said, we need another God. This one's gone, evidently. Maybe he's on vacation. But they wanted something that they could touch, something that they could handle. 11, verse 11. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. King James Version says, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. Expanded Bible says, you must not use the name of the Lord your God thoughtlessly. Lift up the name of the Lord your God in vain. Now, what have we always thought that and been taught that, and everybody thinks that it means when it says don't take the Lord's name in vain? Cursing or cussing. That's what we'd say. You're not supposed to cuss, is what this is saying. Is that what he's saying? He's saying something a whole lot more serious than that. So, I got the Christian Standard Version, New English Translation, the King James Version, and the Expanded Bible. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. New English Translation. You must not make use of the name of the Lord your God for worthless purposes. King James, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Expanded Bible, you must not use the name of the Lord your God thoughtlessly. Lift up the name of the Lord your God in vain. Okay. Which one you like the best? Which one you understand the best? But King James is the least one that I would present to somebody who wants to know what this means, because of the way it's worded. The literal translation for that word of take is do not lift or carry God's name in vain, is what the word means. But when a minister, a Christian, a priest, or anything else takes the name of God and then uses that for evil, that's one of the worst things that you can do. When you say something, you say, God told me to. Think hard before you finish that sentence. God told me, be careful before you finish that, because that's where you get in danger of taking the Lord's name in vain and using it uselessly. It says, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. So it's more than cussing or cursing or using some kind of expletive. It's a lot different than that. It's what you do with the name of God, with who God is taking him in vain as useless, like it says here. Because it says, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Do not misuse it, is what he's talking about. Number 12, be careful to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Is this binding on us as Christians? Okay, that's good. Anything else? Why is it not for us? If it's not for us. If it's not for Christians, why is it not for us? Why is it just for the Jewish people? And why is it we have 10 commandments here, but we have this one that we're saying is not for us, that is just for the Jewish people? Why is that? Exodus 31:16 says, the Israelites must observe the Sabbath. This is before the 10 commandments. This is before any of that. It says, the Israelites must observe the Sabbath, celebrating it throughout their generations as a permanent covenant. Who does it say? the Israelites as a permanent covenant. It is a sign forever between me and the Israelites. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, but on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So he's saying this is a covenant. The way you can tell a Jewish person will tell you, one thing that testifies that they are Jewish is the fact that they honor the Sabbath on Saturday, the seventh day of the week. Did we Christians, don't answer this, did we Christians change it to Sunday? Don't answer the question. We'll get here in a minute. What was the first sign that was given of the covenant between God and Israel? What was the first sign that was set them apart from other nations? That was this commandment. On the seventh day, you remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. What sign is there of the covenant between God and believers today? What's the sign of the covenant today? If it's not a day of the week, what is it? Colossians 2:16. Therefore, don't let anyone judge you in regard to food and drink, or in the matter of a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of what was to come. The substance is Christ. So what sets us apart is Christ, is Jesus. That's what sets us apart, not a day. He fulfilled the covenant of the Sabbath himself. Did he fulfill the rest of these? Yes. If you follow, you don't have to follow any of the Ten Commandments. You don't have to follow any of them at all. As long as you follow Jesus Christ and do exactly what he says. You won't have to worry about, I haven't this year, and I just have to make a confession here, I haven't stolen anything this year. And I did not steal this year because it was in the Ten Commandments. I didn't have to have it in the Ten Commandments. Whether it was there or not, I didn't have to steal anything. There is something, I have a relationship with Jesus Christ that's supposed to govern what I do. It's good to have the words because it helps. But the principle of resting a seventh day is still valid. And I'll read this is a quote. The 7-day cycle, also known as the circadian, that's a hard word to say, rhythm, is a biological rhythm that has been observed in many different species, including humans, according to the field of chronobiology. All life operates on this cycle, and there may be a biological need for the rest on this day. While the daily circadian rhythm is well known, the circadian rhythm is less understood. Equally important. That was written by Genevieve Clark, a nutritional therapist, solicitor, and chartered lawyer. This wasn't by a preacher. This wasn't by a minister. They didn't even say she was a Christian. This came out of a secular magazine. That's where I got this quote. So the principle that God, isn't it amazing that God sets down a principle and still it fits in with how our bodies automatically work. You would think God knew what he was doing. Verse 12. Be careful to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Do not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or your female slave, your ox or your donkey, any of your livestock, or the resident alien who lives within your city gates, so that your male and female slaves may rest as you do. In other words, he gets very specific. Remember that you were a slave, so this is supposed to help them remember this. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a strong hand and outstretched arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. In other words, there's a reason for them keeping the Sabbath day, and it's to help them remember the covenant that they had made with God. Next. They didn't give slaves days off. You worked whenever the master told you to work. Period. Next one. Honor your father and mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long and so that you may prosper in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Okay, this bridges the commandments that are to God and the commandments that are between man, between us, between each other. And so this bridges that. This being the first one, I think I've got this somewhere down here, but this is the first one out of those, and it's the only positive one. This says, honor your father and mother. The others are, you shall not. But this is a positive one. When honoring your father and mother is diminished in a society, the respect for God and the respect for authority in general begins to fade. That's just the truth. The strength of a community is based largely on how citizens show respect for their elders. Now, does this commandment tell you to love your mother and father? And this is what I said before, this is the thou shalt instead of thou shalt not. It says society cannot survive if there is a lack of respect for authority, and that authority begins in the home. That's where authority begins. God never tells us to, He tells us to love. In fact, I think that's the next one. Societies that stress respect for authority over respect for parents have led to and lead to tyranny. In China, for instance, children were encouraged in school to report their parents if their parents did something that was against the communist government. So parents wouldn't even talk between themselves where their children could hear when they said something that was negative about their government, because they could be put in prison or they could have been killed. Mao Zedong, what was it, close to 100 million people he had killed in his wonderful revolution that he had. God tells us to love Him, to love the stranger, to love your enemy, to love your neighbor, but does not tell us to love your parents. Why? Why doesn't He say for you to love your parents? Are there people out here that have parents that are not lovable? Are there people out here that have parents that are bad? They're bad parents. It would be hard for them to love their parents, but that doesn't change the fact that you honor your parents. You still show them honor regardless of whether you can love them or not. There's some people that are just plain hard to love. And that's the way it is. But He never says that, so He tells them to honor their father and mother. Do not murder. And King James says, thou shalt not kill. I've got the note down at the bottom. Only the King James and the Geneva that I can find says thou shalt not kill. It says kill. The rest of them says do murder. Like I said, do not murder. And the reason being, the Hebrew word referring to unjustified, intentional killing, while kill is, and it gives a different word for it, a broader term that can include both justified and accidental killing. So there's two different Hebrew words that we have for kill, and the one that's used here and in both times the Ten Commandments are listed, and it says in the King James, thou shalt not kill, and here it says, do not do murder. The word that's used is the one that's the Hebrew word that means referring to unjustified, intentional killing. So that's murder. And a lot of times people will use, I've known Christians, well-meaning Christians, to say, well, if it says thou shalt not kill, how many of you saw the movie Hacksaw Ridge? That's a great movie. I read the book, saw the movie. That's a great movie, and it's about a real man. I heard his testimony over and over again on the Veterans Days. His name was Desmond Doss. He was Seventh-day Adventist, and he joined, if World War II broke out, he joined the Army, and he said, but I will not carry a gun. He was horribly mistreated in boot camp and everything else. He said, I'm not going to carry a gun. He said, I'll be whatever I can be. He turned out to be a medic, and he wound up, true story, they had to climb up this ridge at the top, and when they got there, all the whole group got there. The Japanese came out of hiding and started, sorry, Dinah. The Japanese came out of hiding. Came out of hiding and started shooting them, and they started coming down. A bunch of them were falling, and all the troops were coming down. They says, and they stood there and said, "Where's Doss? Desmond Doss?" In a few minutes, they see a rope, a wounded person on a rope being let down. And a little while later, another one. He let 75 men down. He would go to them. He would doctor them. He'd take care of them. He'd patch them up. And then he tied a rope around them and sent them down to the bottom. And he did that for 75 people. And he said, and I heard him in his testimony, and he said this, he said, "Lord, let me save one more." So when it came to killing, he took it to the extreme, but you have to admire what he did. But that's not what the Scripture says. It says you should not do murder. Some people won't hunt, won't even kill animals because of that. But I'm glad we can kill animals because we had some beef tonight. And I like animals. 1 John 3:15. New Testament has a way of putting us all on the spot. Everyone who hates his brother or sister is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him. I listened to a Jewish commentator. He says, we as Jews don't understand this because what we are taught and what we go by, actions is what makes the difference. Not your thinking, not your thought. But this says, everyone who hates his brother or sister is a murderer. That's pretty simple. Do not commit adultery. What did Jesus say? You've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So Jesus had to take it a little bit further. But the good news is, the word for lust that's there, to set the heart upon, long for, rightfully or otherwise, covet, desire, would fain, lust after. In other words, more than just looking at a nice look, for you ladies, looking at a good-looking man, or men looking at a good-looking woman. It's different, and that's not what he's talking about there when he says, when Jesus says, if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, basically you have already committed adultery in your heart. Jesus goes deeper than just the physical. Do not steal. Do not give dishonest testimony against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's wife or desire your neighbor's house, his field, his male or female slave, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So, murder is stealing a life. Adultery is stealing a spouse. Stealing is stealing a person, kidnapping, or anything that belongs to them. Coveting leads to stealing. So all of these are in the same category. So, put all of these together. When you covet something, that leads you to do things that you shouldn't do in order to get something that's somebody else's. And that gets us in trouble. Coveting can lead to action. James 3:2 says, "For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is mature, able also to control the whole body." In other words, if we can control our mouth, if we can control our mind, we can control our actions. We can control what we do. Hopefully. Questions or comments?